Can you picture surviving a large radioactive release, falling 10,000 meters, 33,000 feet, from a plane, or being submerged for days? All of this appears to be a death sentence, but today you will meet 5 extraordinary people who overcame these improbable situations. Were they merely incredibly fortunate, or were there strategies they used to survive? Sometimes, a few minute details might be the difference between life and death. For instance, you wouldn't have boarded the train that was about to crash if you had left for work 1 minute sooner. But occasionally, it feels more stranger than that. And today, we'll be concentrating on those tales. Hello everyone. This is AWZ. Welcome to our channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Enjoy. As the lone survivor of JAT Flight 367's 1972 accident, flight attendant Vesna Vulovic currently holds the Guinness World Record for having survived the longest fall, 33,000 feet, without using a parachute. The aircraft crashed over Czechoslovakia after bombs in the cargo compartment exploded. Vulovic remained inside the fuselage as it descended to the ground, wedged in by a food cart, while the other passengers were probably sucked outside. The fact that Vulovic was the only survivor out of the 28 passengers and crew suggests that the trees and snow likely helped soften the impact of the fall. She suffered fractures to her brain, legs, and vertebrae in addition to temporary paralysis. She spent a portion of her rehabilitation in a coma as well. A little over a year after the collision, Vulovic was able to walk once more. Her first memory was of visiting her parents in the hospital. She had no recollection of the flight after boarding. Surprisingly, she kept flying and even wanted to get her previous job back as a flight attendant, but the airline turned her down due to her health. They possibly just didn't want too much exposure about the accident, according to Vulovic. She also objected to the notion that she was fortunate, saying that if it were true, she never would have had this accident. In 2016, Vulovic passed away at the age of 66. Frano Selak, a music instructor from Croatia, earned the moniker the luckiest unluckiest man to have ever lived, or perhaps it was the other way around, because of his extraordinary life story. Given his unique fate, the fact that he was married 6 times just seems like a minor detail in light of all else he endured during his lifetime. Selak earned the reputation of being a guy who had faced death head-on and survived 7 times in total. Selak was involved in accidents involving practically every kind of transportation over the course of 4 decades. A boat, in fact, it was there that he was born in 1929. In the vicinity of Dubrovnik, his parents went fishing. His mother, who was 7 months pregnant at the time, unexpectedly went into labor and gave birth on the boat before they could return to land. In 1957, Frane Selak experienced his first near-death experience when the bus he was riding in veered off the road and into a river. Selak and the bus driver both succeeded in exiting the vehicle, and they swam to land. Later, Selak claimed that although Ahmet the driver was a great driver, he never went behind the wheel without having consumed half a bottle of rakiya. In reality, they both drank rakiya before getting on the bus, and the original reason for the excursion was to go acquire a few more rounds. With only a few minor wounds and bruises, they both made it through the accident. In 1962, disaster happened once more while traveling by rail from Sarajevo to Dubrovnik. The train jumped off the tracks and crashed into the freezing river Neretva when a boulder dropped onto the track. Selak was able to escape the bus by smashing the compartment window, saving not only his own life, but also the life of an acquaintance who was traveling with him. Residents of the surrounding village helped both of them out of the river, and Selak merely sustained a fractured arm and hypothermia. In the crash, another 17 passengers perished. In 1963, Selak traveled by charter from Zagreb to Rijeka to see his ailing mother. He managed to persuade the crew to let him board despite the fact that the flight was completely booked by explaining that he was experiencing a family emergency. He was seated behind Rosika, a flight attendant, in the back of the aircraft. The aircraft experienced a technical issue not far from the airport of destination, began losing altitude, and eventually crashed on a boulder. Before the accident, the plane's door was torn out, and Selak was sucked out at an altitude of 800 meters. Against all odds, he managed to land in a haystack, which saved his life. While all the other passengers perished in the collision, Rosica also survived. Naturally, Selak never again boarded a plane. Fisherman Salvador Alvarenga washed up on shore about 7,000 miles from where he had set off after spending 14 months at sea. Alvarenga and his friend Ezequiel Cordoba were stranded in a violent storm in 2012 as they tried to return to the Mexican coast during a fishing excursion. They were traveling in a 25-foot boat that was almost invisible at sea. The waves were forcing them farther and deeper into the open water as the engine had just died. The two developed a mechanism to gather rainwater and caught fish and seabirds by hand, sometimes curing the meat and other times eating it raw. Cordoba, however, fell into a depression after 2 months of their experience, stopped taking food and water, and passed very shortly after. Alvarenga was grieved to lose his lone companion, and for 6 days prior to burying Cordoba at sea, he spoke to the corpse as if he were still alive. After 438 days at sea, Alvarenga spotted land and landed on the Eben Atoll, where Emi Libigmito and Russell Likidrick found him gazing at their vacation home. Alvarenga used his vivid imagination to keep from becoming despondent. Alvarenga tried to depict his dilemma using stick figures as they battled to communicate, but eventually help arrived, and after 11 days in the hospital, he was given the all-clear to go back home to El Salvador. Anatoly Bugorsky, radiation beam impact. Anatoly worked as a physicist at the biggest particle accelerator in the Soviet Union in 1978. He entered the machine to make repairs when a piece of machinery started to malfunction. At the same time, a number of safety features malfunctioned, causing a proton beam to strike him practically instantly. More than 400 times the typical deadly amount of radiation entered his head. Within a few hours, his face had become unrecognizably swollen. Doctors were able to view the path the beam took through the patient's skull and brain since the skin at the entry and exit wounds had been pulled away. To put it mildly, his rehabilitation was a strange process. Only one side of his face became older, and the other side was partially paralyzed. He lost his hearing and started having seizures as time went on. Despite all of this, he managed to finish his doctoral program. His enigmatic survival tale is attributed by experts to the fact that the particle beam was extremely focused and narrow, which limited the degree of brain damage. Because he was in solitary confinement for drunk and disorderly behavior at the time, Ludger Silberis was one of the few people to survive the cataclysmic eruption of Mt. Pelee, a volcano just north of Saint-Pierre in Martinique. Nearly every building in Saint-Pierre was destroyed, and everyone in its path was set ablaze when Pelee erupted on May 8, 1902, killing nearly all 30,000 inhabitants of the city. In order to protect himself from additional burns and the intense heat, Silberis peed on his clothes and jammed them in the opening as ash began to pour in through the little hole in his cell door as he watched the eruption. He was found 4 days later. In his role as the only living object that survived in the silent city of death, Silberis continued to travel with Barnum and Bailey's circus. Since all the witnesses were deceased and all the documents were destroyed, there was considerable conjecture that he had actually been jailed for a crime more serious than a drunken altercation. However, no one explored this theory. Only a few thousand people now call Saint-Pierre, which was formerly referred to as the Paris of the West Indies, home. Saint-Pierre never fully recovered from the disaster. This is all for today. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe our channel. Stay tuned with AWZ.